Last week, the audio online wasn't as good as I would have liked. So just as a quick review, we basically talked about personhood, and we had the sled test, which is just an easy way to remember a good argument for personhood, right? You can't say that an unborn child isn't a human because of its size. We can't say that because of its level of development, because remember, level of development varies all across different human growth. Like my daughter is less developed than a 6-year-old, but it's because she's almost 2, environment, inside or outside the womb doesn't matter, because again, different environment doesn't change personhood. And of course, dependency, just because it depends on the mother to survive does not mean it's less than a person, because again, my daughter is very dependent. I would argue I'm also very dependent on my wife. So I find level of development to be obviously silly. But sled test is really good because most of your conversations are going to revolve around personhood. And that is just a really great acronym to help you guys remember just how do I want to navigate. Oh, they just made a size argument. Oh, they made a level of development argument, sort of thing. So also, I'm super jazzed because yesterday we had a little conference get together with talkaboutdoubts.com, founded by Dr. Jonathan McGlatchy and the Dr. Timothy McGrew and Lydia McGrew and Bethel McGrew, all the McGrews. So they're down in Kalamazoo. He teaches at Western, and actually David Paulman's here, the one taking a picture right now. Awkward. But David Paulman is a friend of mine. We actually were internet friends, oddly enough, and we became good friends, and we lit the internet on fire in some theology discussions. He came up to visit because he's with the talkaboutdoubts.com, so we got to get together. It's been a lot of fun. So the thing is what was fun about our time to talk about doubts is that when you're in a room with like 6 PhDs who have been doing this for a lot longer than you, it's a really fun experience for me when I walk in going, I'm the idiot. This is so fun. I didn't dare open my mouth much because I'm like, they will correct it like that if there's anything wrong. So it was a lot of fun, great time. Anyhow. With that being said, let's just jump into this a little bit. So remember last week we talked about personhood, and we also talked about kind of some tactics. Like, of course, you want to be loving and kind, but some people, I'm not sure if you've ever discussed with someone who's a malicious pro-choicer, and those are the ones I say that it's kind of okay if you need to match the intensity, or even make them look silly in some of their argumentation. Because sometimes people need that moment when they realize that they have taken their discussion too far. But I don't want you guys just to be complete and total jerks either, because this is one of those topics that could get majorly misconstrued a lot. So first, I want to start off with a quote from a pro-life apologist, which is, my goal isn't to make abortion illegal, but to make abortion unthinkable. That was by Abby Johnson. And that's exactly what we want to do. So I want to talk about the reality of Roe v. Wade right now, because that was overturned. And I thought this was going to be 2 to 3 weeks and probably be more like 3 to 4. I just started realizing my data. I was looking, I'm like, might be a little longer. But so with Roe v. Wade, I want us to make sure we understand the reason why it was overturned is that there is actually no constitutional right to an abortion. And this was actually fabricated based on politically corrupt court, essentially, if you go back and read the case. Hence why it went back to the states. However, this is also another issue because, yes, is that a win for the pro-life movement? Yes, huge win. But at the same time, it's still back in the states. So there's still places like California and New York where abortion is legal. So it's not like we won the fight, right? It's just we made effort and we made a good step in the right direction. But if you read the Constitution, people will talk about this. Well, it's a constitutional right to an abortion. There is none, right? If you read through the Constitution, there isn't one. In fact, it actually violates the Constitution that says everyone has the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Life being obviously necessary. So then they will usually argue for bodily autonomy or the right to property from the Constitution. However, that is why the argument from personhood that we reviewed last week is so important. You need to know how to argue what is a person, right? So that's why size, level of development, environment, dependency, none of these things make someone a person. The only way we can consistently say someone's a person is at the moment of conception, because that is the moment their DNA and all those things are born, right? Take the DNA sample from the moment of conception all the way to when they're a 100-year-old man and pass away. It's going to be the same DNA, right? It's going to be the same everything. So, all right.
Do you know what brought the Supreme Court to re-examine this? Why now?
Why now? Essentially, Well, go ahead,
I was
Micah.
going to say it's because of the Mississippi courts, right? So after that,
The heartbeat law.
yeah,
Right.
Okay.
yeah, Mississippi court.
Yep.
So just some of the other
Yeah,
states
so-
pushing, they looked at it.
And then of course Clarence Thomas is absolutely based. So he's just that man. Have you ever watched the documentary about his life? It's actually really good. But all right. So the reality is most people who want abortions will still have access to them. That's the reality even after Roe v. Wade. So most people want them, can still get them. In fact, there's actually employers that are offering to pay like up to $5,000 for their employees, like Dick's Sporting Goods is doing this, $5,000 so you can go over to a state where you can have an abortion. People are like, see, look at these wonderful companies. I'm like, actually, it really comes down to they don't want to pay for the insurance for the birth. Yep. They don't want to deal with your maternity leave. So it comes down to this is actually an economic thing for the company, really. So it really comes down to like, do they really care about you women? Do they? I'd argue probably not. So Norma McCorvey, a.k.a. Roe, in the Roe v. Wade case back in the day, I don't know if you know this, but she actually became a huge pro-life advocate after Roe v. Wade. And a quote from her is, "Upon knowing God, I realized that my case, which I legalized abortion on demand, was the biggest mistake of my life." So a lot of people like to ignore the fact that she became a pro-life advocate after her own case. So anyway. So now I really want to just kind of give you guys a bit of a warning. Don't fall for it because there are some tactics that you are going to run into when you're talking to pro-choice people or having this conversation. And David Paulman, actually, since you're here, you actually made a great post that pointed to it a while ago that the issue between pro-life and pro-choicers is that we're not getting to the issue of contention because oftentimes pro-choicers, their tactics are going to be always smoke and mirrors or red herrings, bringing up things that are unrelated to try to shove the actual point of contention down and kick the can, if you will, down the road, right? So they rarely address the actual point of contention, which is it a person, is it a life, and does it have rights? And generally use dishonest tactics in an attempt to shut it down, and they will attempt also to overstate their case. So a great example of this is like a dishonest tactic would be trying to hide behind someone's rape to justify the rest of abortions, okay? It's a dishonest tactic. You're using the minority to justify the majority. And you also hear this. When you're talking to them, you're like, well, the thing is that biologists agree, life starts at conception, blah, 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 blah. And then usually you'll hear something like this. Well, opinions are mixed on that, right? They'll say, and as a way to say, your point is not valid because there's opinions that are mixed. But what the irony of this is that they actually believe that their side is correct, but they will hide behind the plurality of opinions to sit there and say that you can't say they're wrong, objectively wrong. Well, really, they're slipping in through the back door trying to tell you you're objectively wrong. Have you guys ever seen somebody do that tactic? Like, well, not all people agree on this, but you're wrong. So it's like, well, okay, if all people don't agree and it's all subjective, then you don't have the right to make an objective claim about my rightness or wrongness. David.
So what I'm hearing is that you as a man think that men should just have the control over women's bodies.
But it's not a woman's body, scientifically. We're going to get into that. Oh, so DNA, separate from the mother? Unless a woman has 20 fingers and then suddenly doesn't one day. Or gives birth to her own body that suddenly is not her body.
We don't even know we can't define what a woman.
What is a woman anyway?
I can find that statement offensive when they talk about men controlling. There are many women who do not support abortion.
Exactly.
And I find that very offensive when people say that.
Oh, I find it the same way whenever like, well, it's just men trying to control women's bodies. I'm like, do you know how many women are pro-life?
Oh, no kidding.
Men love pro-choice movement because for them, they're like, ooh, I get to have irresponsible sex and have zero consequences. Well, a lot of women actually are very pro-life.
Yeah.
David.
Like, also, where did the idea come from that like you can't have an opinion on it if you're a man?
Well, I mean, it would just be like saying like, well, then I can't have an opinion on slavery because I'm not black.
Right, and also, I mean, men are involved. Like, they have children too, right?
Mm-hmm.
It takes two to tango.
The unfortunate thing is,
Is that what we're calling it now?
the unfortunate thing is so many men are irresponsible and
Right.
women are left with the child
Right.
without support and without payment, hence Grace's Table and Alpha Grand Rapids.
Right.
Well, if you don't-
So,
if you don't have an AR-15, you can't have an opinion on AR-15.
right. Well, then, that comes down to it, right? Like, at what point do you draw the conclusion? You have to be an X group in order to have an X opinion. That just gets ridiculous. Like, the more and more you break that down. So today I want to focus mainly on statistics, and like kind of argumentation from statistics and how we can address some of those. That's going to be the main focus of today. We'll keep going through. I also have some scriptural arguments that we'll get to, but again, like I said, I'm not a big fan of using scriptural arguments because if somebody is not a Christian, well, then you're shooting empty bullets, right? If they are a Christian, then great, you can have a scriptural conversation, but otherwise, it's going to fall on deaf ears, and it really bothers me when I see Christians doing that. Like, well, God says, I'm like, yeah, but if they don't believe in God, it's pointless. And they're like, well, I want them to believe in God first. I'm like, no, we want to save lives. Okay, that's what when we're having this conversation, the goal is save lives. Okay, so the statistical reality, I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of how many abortions happen a year. So in 2020, we had 930,160. And if you look throughout the years, we have all the way down to the year of 2000, and you'll notice actually abortions are going down because they used to be over 1 million, well over 1 million. They've slowly gone down. Now, this could be for multiple reasons, but actually there are a lot of reasons for this, and I don't have time to get into all of it. One is we're probably getting better, and we are getting better at just preventative maintenance, so to speak. But also, I don't know if you know this, but due to the rise of pornography use, there's actually less young men, even in college and whatnot, who actually want to have sex. Fun fact for you, they're just more would rather watch pornography. So things like that, there's a lot of decline in those areas. So in fact, if you even look at birth rates for replacement rates right now, those are going down. Yeah. Russia's had that problem for a while where people are dying faster than reproducing. And they actually have like a national holiday, essentially, that's National Baby Making Day. I'm not even kidding. Like, go home, make children. We need to replace the dying people.
Can we get that over there?
No, Micah, no. You have to be married.
No. I was asking about the statistics. Is this just America?
Is this just America?
Yeah,
This is America. Yes, only in the U.S. U.S. alone. So that should be telling you quite a bit right there. We have about 1 million per year. You could say 900,000 if you're having a conversation with somebody, because some people are like, well, abortions don't happen all that much. It's like, are you serious? Over 900,000 a year is a ton of abortions. So there's also this claim, people will say that before 1973, and you guys may have heard something like this before, that 17 to 18% of women were dying in illegal and botched abortions. So if we make it illegal, more women will die. Have you guys ever heard something like this?
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. All right, great. So the reality, though, is that this is actually a statistic from 1930 from the Great Depression. However, the reality, though, is that in 1973, only 24 women died from legal abortions, 39 died from illegal abortions, from about 900,000. So when they're making it out like it's this gigantic number, it's not. And of course, during the Great Depression, there was a lot of things that weren't going well during that time. So you are spinning a narrative, okay, first off. So they will overstate their case, like I said. You have to be careful on how they do their statistics. So usually almost every time a pro-choicer throws a stat at me, I almost every time go, I'm going to look into that, because it's most likely false. And it is. So, also, in 2014, 6 women alone died from an abortion. And there were about 927,000 abortions during that time. So, again, is 6 too many? Do we want women to die in abortions? No, we don't want people to die. Again, we're the pro-life people. We want you to live. But the thing is that this is hardly something that we're seeing where women are dying left and right? If things don't go their way. So, so if we go all the way from that, so there were 927,000 abortions in 2014. That means 0.00065% mortality rate. Okay, so very few in that year. And so I have a source right there for you guys. Like I said, at the end of all this, I'm going to get everyone's emails who want them, and I will send you a bunch of my notes on the data, spreadsheets, the whole nine. Okay, I've done more research on this than I care to admit. All right. So, let's talk about heartbeats. So, heartbeats actually begin around 3 to 5 weeks. They will argue this sometimes because, like, well, really what it is like a pulsing vein for the small little embryo stage. But the problem is that that's still blood flow, right? That's still something pumping blood. So no matter which way you spin it, well, it's not really a fully grown heart. It still would be considered a heartbeat. So heartbeats begin in about 3 to 5 weeks, and only 34% of abortions happen prior to 6 weeks, which means the overwhelming majority of abortions are actually stopping a baby's heart along with vital organs. So keep that in mind. Most abortions, so if only 35% happen before this period, the rest are happening when the baby is far more developed than we want to admit, okay? The vast majority of them. So, and again, like I've said before, it's not saying that later abortions are worse than earlier abortions because it's still a life, right? It's still a valuable life all the way through. So, why women have abortions? How many of you guys hear that women have abortions because health reasons all the time, and it's not because of convenience reasons? It's really all, women are going through too much, they have all this stuff going on. However, in 2004, Guttmacher, and by the way, Guttmacher Institute is not conservative. They're actually very liberal. They're very pro-choice, okay? So even their own sources can confirm. So in 2004, Guttmacher surveyed over 1,200 women who were post-abortive. So in other words, they've had abortions, and their reasons for opting to have an abortion. And I want you guys to notice the statistics. 86% stated a personal convenience reason. Not ready was 25%. Can't afford the child was 23%. Done having kids was 19%. Don't want to be a single mother was 8%. Not mature enough was 7%. Or would interfere with education or career was 4%. So when you look at this, are any of those dealing with the absolute life of the mother? Or health issues? No. They're all convenience reasons, which is why I will regularly say the overwhelming majority of abortions are due to convenience. Now, people, for example, money, right? People are like, well, I don't have money. I can't afford a kid. Let me ask the room, how many of you have children? How many of you guys felt like you could afford a child? No one in this room. Because the moment we're like, you're pregnant, your baby's coming, I was like, oh my gosh, how are we going to afford X, Y, Z? You know, just all of a sudden you get it all, you start worrying about all this stuff. When my daughter was born 2 months early from the NICU, and our bills all together, thank God for insurance, was about $450,000. My friend Brian, his son Braden, was an over $1 million baby. So when you're considering this, like, yeah, no one thinks that they can afford a child. In fact, I know many people who they keep having kids and like, we just don't know how we're going to take care of them, and the Lord always provides, or we always, find a way. So the point is that if it's important to you, you will make it work, right? If you have a child, period. Okay. I've seen plenty of people in different, and sometimes you have to make sacrifices, but parenting is, how many of you guys are parents again? Great. How many of you guys have sacrificed for your child? How many hours of sleep alone, right? There is so much sacrifice that goes on there. So what it comes down to is, I don't want to make the sacrifices. It's a personal convenience problem, okay?
You're really strong on that. I agree with that statement, but I'm a little bit upset with the word convenience, because there's a lot of women who have an abortion that they feel it's their last choice. So I agree that there are women who have it with convenience, but there's a whole group of women who it's their last choice.
That's what they think is their last choice. Doesn't mean it is.
Possibly, but if you're having parents who say they're going to kick you out of the home, they don't have anywhere to go, they don't feel there's resources. I mean, you're simplifying it just a little bit from my comfort zone, because I think there's a lot of...
Well, it does come down to something relatively simple, though. Because whether or not you think you have resources or not, whether or not I kill my child does come down to personal convenience, because I don't want to be kicked out. I want to have, but there are resources out there. Most people do know there's resources out there.
No, I disagree with you on that.
A lot of people know
I
the
would say
resources.
this too: if you don't want the kid, you don't have to kill the kid. Give the kid up for adoption. Why does the kid have to die?
I'm not arguing for abortion. I'm arguing for sensitivity.
Well, bottom line is, this is why I'm pulling up stats, because numbers don't lie. Right?
That's fine.
And numbers
sensitive.
and numbers. Well, that's why I'm not saying being sensitive here. I'm just saying this is what it says. 86% are due to personal convenience. Period.
I think it's perception of their reality and feeling like they have no other choice. There are some who just
Perception
abort
is-
because,
That still leaves a whole 14%. So, a
well,
not insignificant number.
I just, how many of you have talked to someone who's had an abortion? Okay, and is it, okay, I just,
I agree.
Dom?
you agree with me?
I do.
I think,
What?
yes, because it's heartbreaking for people.
Dominic?
Choices has consequences. That's what my dad always used to say. It is true. So it's, you made the choice.
Right now, well, then what it comes down to is that, and then you're going to make another person suffer, which is why the argument from personhood is important. It's not simplifying. It's just saying the reality that these things are not life threatening or health threatening,
Right.
because at that point you could make another choice. It's just whether or not you're willing to make that big of a sacrifice.
Mhm.
That's what it comes down to.
How many of you been in a situation where you don't know what your next thing is? Yeah, and but you have resources and you have, we're all middle class people.
Well,
Wait. So I would say I would say about a year ago when me and Micah got kicked out of our former church. Me and Micah had no idea what we were going to do, and thank God that Bill came to our rescue and provided for us a place to stay. But if it wasn't for Bill, me and Micah would have moved to Tennessee and had to figure out what we're gonna do from there. So I understand where you're coming from, but but the thing is you don't always know what you're going to do, and so you just have to trust God and have faith.
well, the bottom line is what this comes down to is, again, what is the reason for the abortion? If it's not life of the mother at all, and it's not health issue, then either everyone's situation is a little bit more complicated than the next. But bottom line is it does come to some level of our personal convenience.
Yeah.
Whether you're willing to sacrifice being kicked out of mom and dad's home, or whether you're willing to sacrifice stepping out of school, or whether you're, having to move in with a friend, things like that. There's always options, though. There are options, and there is plenty of options available. That's why there's a ton of resources for single women. Actually, if you look at battered women's shelters in comparison to battered men's shelters, there's one battered men's shelter in the States. So, and compared to women's who are all over. We even have war here in Grand Rapids. Brittany.
So even if you do the adoption, so you don't have to pay any money, right?
Mm-hmm.
The parents adopting the kids pay all your
Mm-hmm.
medical expenses. So that would be, I think, the easiest way to not kill your child and not owe any money.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get to the adoption statistics too. So anyway, bottom line is we have 25% say they're not ready, 23% they can't afford, only 19% say they're just done having kids. That is absolutely a convenience problem. Don't want to be a single mother was only 8%, and not mature enough 7%. So none of these according to Guttmacher, deal with that intense of a situation. Just I can't afford it, or I'm done having kids, or I don't think I'm ready.
So how many are life-threatening?
Great question, and we're going to get into that. So that's the next part. So let's go ahead and jump in. All right, so we're going to keep moving here. So rape, all right? So if we make abortion illegal, raped women will be forced to have their rapist child. After all, have you heard this statistic? 1 in 5 women are raped on college campuses. Have you heard that statistic? You've never heard the 1 in 5? Wow. Yeah, the 1 in 5 is a big one that comes up. But the problem is that there's a ton of problems with that study. So, all right, this claim comes from a 2007 campus sexual assault study. It only surveyed 2 universities, and only 5,446 undergrad women participated and were rewarded actually a $10 gift card for participating. This was considered also a low response rate. But here's the thing on the questions on this statistic. This statistic included being too drunk, high, drugged to give consent, and about events that you think but are not certain happened. So, what do you think is the problem with that? Well, I don't know if you guys have ever looked at university frat parties, but most people are inebriated, a lot. And so then the question comes into, can you say that regret equals rape? No. Right? So it included these, and in fact, Dr. Christina Hoff Summers stated that the CSA and the CDC studies have had issues as no one interviewed was asked if they had actually been raped or sexually assaulted. They were just like these other vague topics, which is interesting. So then, if we keep going, rape, if we make abortion illegal again, so that 1 in 5 women statistic as mentioned. But the thing is, 61.5%, the CDC projected to be rape victims in 2010 experienced alcohol and drug facilitated penetration. So if a woman was unconscious or incapacitated, most women would call that rape. And I agree, right? If she's passed out, that would be rape. But if a woman was inebriated, just drunk, intoxicated, under the influence, few would actually usually call this rape. After all, a large percentage of sexual intercourse in general is done while drunk, even in marriages, statistically.
What's the legal definition?
The legal definition of what, rape?
Yeah, isn't it consent?
Yeah, giving consent. So the question is can somebody not give consent while they're drunk?
I mean, you have to be aware of what you're...
Right, hence why they're saying that if you're passed out, unconscious, or incapacitated, so that would be considered rape. But otherwise, you just made poor choices and you're using that as an excuse.
I think it gets fuzzy too because like there's kind of like a spectrum of drunkenness and like people can have different levels of awareness along the way, and so it's kind of a vague question. Like, at what point are you no longer?
Well, and that's exactly what
you're doing?
that's what people have pointed out in the study. They're like, well, this is as vague as heck. Like, it depends how someone interprets the question, interprets on where you're at on that spectrum. Are you talking about someone who's a little buzzed, or someone who's pretty buzzed, or are we talking about someone who's like blackout drunk? Like, where are we at on this? Like, so when you have people who, and you're only pulling 2 universities, and then there's also the bias that people tend to participate in a study if they feel they've been wronged, right? In that. So then you also get the bias of the spike of other people jumping in. So basically, this entire study has been debunked by a ton of statisticians. Like, this is actually a very poor study. So whenever you hear the 1 in 5 women, just know it is actually not true. So in short, like I said, regret does not equal rape. These are but just a few issues with this study. I didn't have time, actually, so the document that I was reading was like pages long. So I just wanted to give you guys some bullet points from it, okay? So, let's see, what's another one dealing with rape? So, and don't worry, we will deal with some of the as far as health issues are concerned as well. But, so rape. If we make abortion illegal, again, that comes up further. Some other things about that study. So in 1996, the estimated amount of pregnancies from rape was actually 5%, which is pretty high, actually. The study also found that 32% kept the baby, 50% aborted, and 5.9% gave the baby up for adoption, and 11.8% miscarried. Fun fact. So today, I don't know if you know this, how many, I think I already have it up there, don't I? Yep, I do. So today, less than 2% of pregnancies are due to rape. Less than 2%, okay? So we have to make sure we understand that less than 2% of pregnancies are due to rape, and less than 0.5% of abortions are being done due to rape. So, and again, this is all from Guttmacher and actual statistics that you can look. It's not some obscure site. You can find them all. So when we're saying that today, when we're using rape, for example, as an excuse, can you see how little of a percentage we're using to justify the majority?
So that, 0.5%.
Yes, sir.
So, when my mind's working, if this law goes through, will rape go up for convenience with rape statistics?
Like, will more people say that they're...
I have a
how the law is
I have a feeling that you will see probably an increase of people claiming, which we already have that going on now anyway.
Right.
We're seeing that a lot even on university campuses. It's actually becoming a huge problem. But it's hard to say, right? Maybe not. I hope not. So we're using extreme examples to justify the majority. So in the end, we're using something that is less than 1% of the cases and using it to justify the majority. Now let's talk about partial birth abortion. Now this is why when it comes to this topic, I've said this before many times. There is the discussion of the mother, right? The mother, like, of course, we don't want the mother to suffer any more than she needs to, right? We don't want those things. The issue is that we have to remember there's 2 lives in the balance here. 2, right? It's not one in favor of the other. It's we have 2 lives, period. So the question is then, so when we're talking about caring about this sort of thing, we need to understand the reality of some horrific ways that abortion is dealt with. How many of you guys have ever heard of a partial birth abortion, for example? So partial birth abortions, many claim that we shouldn't be concerned with such because it is a statistical rarity. Which is funny because it's also coming from the same people who talk about rape abortions to use to justify the rest. And you go, well, partial birth, and they go, well, you're using the more minority case there. And you're like, well, okay, so I don't know how you square that circle. But 0.2% are partial birth abortions, so they are rare. However, these aren't any worse than an unbirthed abortion, so I want you guys to be aware of that. The world just finds it more horrific because it was clearly a child to them because they actually saw the child, so they consider it to be a tragedy. That's why a lot of people find partial birth abortion to be abhorrent, even if they're pro-choice. Because like, oh, that's just terrible. That's a fully grown baby in there. It's like, well, why is it okay at 32 weeks? Why is it not okay at 32 weeks, but it's okay at 22 weeks? It's the same child. It's just one's more developed than the other. So again, level of development does not dictate personhood. So, and then another claim, we should have free contraceptives available, and that would reduce abortions. You guys have probably heard that one, right? Mm-hmm. Right? We should have free contraceptives. Problem is, it doesn't actually work out economically. I don't know if you guys know this, but an average abortion costs $500 to $700. And contraceptives, just for a box of condoms, cost about $10 to $15. Okay? $10 to $15 for a box of condoms alone. So clearly this isn't an affordability problem, but a priority problem. Because if you're willing to pay for a $500 to $700 abortion, but you're not willing to pay for a $10 to $15 box of condoms, you tell me whether or not you can afford the condoms. Or even day after pills, things like that. It's way cheaper than an abortion. So when people make the affordability of contraception, there's instantly an economic problem here, right? The numbers don't shake out.
You mentioned that morning after pill. Would that still be considered
Mm-hmm.
an abortion?
Oh yeah, most morning after pills, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's why I'm not but it's funny when they talk about contraceptions like that, like, well, we just can't afford contraception. It's like, well, but you can afford a $500 to $700 abortion? Make that make sense, right? It's like me going, well, I that's actually like, I actually deal with risk assessment all day long at my job in the auto industry. Brandon.
Does insurance help with that cost though?
Depending on the insurance, it can.
So in theory, some could.
Yes.
Right.
It's a medical procedure, so it would be eligible for insurance.
Yep, depends on the insurance of whether or not they would cover it, but yes. It could be considered all on that, but also you consider that most people who are doing that could also afford $10 worth of Starbucks or whatever. So it's one of those things where whenever you say that, I'm like, yeah, it's just like, so again, you have the economic problem of like, okay, really, that just seems like it's a deflection.
But I think Medicaid pays for it.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, because.
So it would be free.
Yep. So, but
that is cheaper. I think so. Medicaid pays.
Yeah, so that would be free.
That would be free where the condoms are not and the birth control is not.
Right, but then it's still $10 to $15. Can you afford Starbucks? Can you afford to go out to McDonald's? You can afford these things. You're making an economic issue problem there. Jordan, what's your face?
Well, it's back years ago when I listened to Rush, he points out that the government is paying for it, and then you look at the amount of donations that go from Planned Parenthood to a political party. It's just the money laundering.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the $500 to $700. That's not being paid by the low-income person. It's being paid for by the government.
Right. Which is, so that also comes down to the problem of, that's why the government probably shouldn't be involved in this sort of thing at all. So, anyway.
So, there's a political reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just economics either.
Right. Exactly. So my point is here is that generally speaking, contraceptives are only $10 to $15, and you get quite a few condoms with that, so you'd have plenty of time to have fun. So
the birth control pills are way more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
They're just $10 a month. It's not.
They're not insanely expensive.
Yeah. So.
People always talk about how expensive birth control is. It's not.
Right, and that's what I mean. It comes down to a level of priority, right? It's a priority issue. So, again, back to the convenience problems. 4 out of 10 women, I've heard this, who have had abortions are allegedly churchgoers. So when you hear this against you, because they'll use it like as a weapon, like, oh, but you churchgoers, bunch of hypocrites, but bam, and pull out the hammer. So a couple of things. One, Christians still sin. Whoa. All right. So we're still sinners. All right. So we shouldn't be surprised when sinners sin. Okay. Also, this is also why Christians do need to be careful on how they respond to pregnancies that happen outside of marriage within the church. Because if it happens, I've seen it plenty of times where Christians flip out. And, well, what you need to do is you need to go, okay, that was a mistake. Usually the girl knows that it was a mistake because she's pretty humiliated. So at that point, just support her, help her with the baby, be a church, right? So I don't think I need to, this church is very good about that sort of thing, so I don't think I need to emphasize that too hard, but I have had to do that in the past with churches. Also, I will say I will take a jab at purity culture, which tends to do actually a lot of damage, even though its desire was actually to promote godliness. So I think we have some wrong views on how we promote and discuss sex in the church, so I think that's an issue. Trying to see where I put the answer to your question, Mary. So give me a minute. So also, many claim that having access to less restrictive abortions or abortions on demand, free contraceptives, housing, food, etc., decreases abortions. But actually, the data is mixed at best on this. So a couple of things about the data. First off, the Netherlands. The Netherlands require actually a license to perform abortions up to 22 weeks, mandatory 5-day waiting period. After 24 weeks, it must be an emergency, not just arbitrary medical reasons, and also must be done in a hospital, and any abortion in less than the first 3 weeks are actually not counted. So it's kind of hard to narrow that down, but notice how even the Netherlands, which they always point to like as like a place of praise for all health rights, notice how they are more restrictive than even our country. Because ours is like, they're advocating for free on demand. It's like, well, the Netherlands don't even do free on demand, and they're pretty loose. New Mexico has the lowest abortion rate in the U.S., but they also have no restrictions at all at 15%, and that at their rate is at 15%. Well, they have the lowest, but I thought if there was no restrictions, all these different things on that, right? But the 3 states with the highest abortion rates also have no restrictions, such as D.C., New York, or New Jersey. So I don't really see how that connects. Does that make sense? Because there is no really causation relation there. It's just, and this is why I've argued before, what comes down to with abortion is largely cultural and value-based. So it's whether or not in a certain environment it's valued as a human being or it's not, and that's promulgated amongst those people. We all know New York is highly liberal, and therefore they run around constantly with a clump of cells, don't tell them what to do with their body. So therefore, New York's abortion rates are going to be way up because their values on pregnancies are very different than a place like New Mexico. What is a big group of people down in a place like New Mexico? Thank you. I was like, come on, guys. It's right in the name. So you have Mexicans. And what do Mexicans normally subscribe to religiously? Catholicism. So they have a value base there, don't they? So, and well, I don't know if you know this, but the largest giving group to most pro-life causes are Catholics. So when you're sitting there saying, oh, no restrictions means less abortions, well, not for New York, not for New Jersey, not for D.C., in New Mexico, though, it's like there's very few, and they don't have restrictions. It comes down to a value-based issue. Does that make sense? So a lot of our problems in our culture today are really cultural issues. They're value issues. They're not necessarily as scientific as people want to make it out to be. It really comes down to a value or a moral. So I don't know where I put it in here. So I'll just try to answer your question. But there's very few women with actual health issues that are threatening. Is very few in comparison. We have, I want to say the number was 700 women a year that die from pregnancies. And that's still too many, right? Again, we don't want people dying. But it's not like, compared to how many are born and how many pregnancies that exist, it's a very finite number. Very minute. Does that make sense?
Especially since like C-sections are so common nowadays.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's what happened with me, my wife and my child. The child was having problems and they were just like, ejection handle, pull it out. My friend Brian, his son, 25 weeks. His wife had preeclampsia, and they needed to remove Braden before it became clampsia. Well, I don't know if you know this, but basically, clampsia will kill a woman, right? She will die. So what they did was, instead of going, well, guess we got to abort the kid, it was, all right, how long can you hold on to this child and give the child a fighting chance? That was what it came to. It wasn't discounting the life of the child, going, well, we just abort it, it's not a life. It turned into the value system of, there's 2 lives here. We know we can save the mother. Can we save the child too? We will try. And then, as opposed to just discarding it like it's not valuable at all, still treating it like it's life. And therefore, if it passes, it's still something to be mourned, not something to just be like, well, it was a nothing, right? I don't know how many of you guys know someone who's had a miscarriage in the first or second trimester? And how many people were devastated that you met that had those? Are you going to tell them that that's not a person? That's not something to be lost? No, it's just a clump of cells. Suddenly the narrative changes as soon as the child is wanted. I want you guys to notice that. The narrative changes when the child is wanted. For example, you'll notice even in celebrity magazines, I don't want you, so-and-so pregnant with baby. But if that lady got pregnant and got abortion and then is a celebrated, oh, she got an abortion, it was just a clump of cells, guys. So that's why I'm saying you have to be careful. Our culture is going to continually shift the narrative whenever it's convenient for them. We just have to go, how do we measure what personhood is? And the reason why this sounds like a closing statement is because we're going to have to get to the rest of this mostly next week, but let me jump into this next part real fast and we'll close up. Many claim that having access to less restrictive abortion. Oh yeah, so back to that, the claim that if people have access to abortions on demand, free contraceptives, housing, food, all these things will decrease abortions. And how the data is mixed at best, here's more. In 16 states with the lowest abortion rate, also have the most restrictions in the U.S. So we're seeing that also, you can make a claim here that more restrictions mean less abortions, okay? Wyoming, South Dakota are at 2% and 4% respectively. Netherlands has 50 times the number of abortions as South Dakota, but only 19 times the population. Now, how many of you guys, when you think of South Dakota, do you guys normally think liberal or conservative? Right. Y'all might remember the governor during COVID was very based. Wherever you fell on that spectrum, I don't really care. But the point is that it's a very conservative state, which means that there's what kind of value is usually there? A pro-life value, right? Which is probably why there's so few abortions, because there's a value, a place to it. So, then if you look at where there's no limits in abortions, now this is in the world, guys. This is actually where it gets scary. So the countries with no limitations on abortions are some states in the United States, Canada, and then China and North Korea are the only countries with no limitations on abortions. Let that sink in. We're hanging out with China and North Korea on this one. And Canada. I'm over here like the commies, and you're over there like, no, the Canadians. But it should tell you something that's like even the Netherlands, even European countries, France, England, all that, even at least they have enough sense to be like, we're at least putting some restrictions on this. Yeah. Right? And again, it doesn't really matter, restricted or not, it's still killing a person, right? Because how do you define personhood? Well, only way to do that consistently across the line is at conception, as we discussed last week. I don't have time to review all that. Okay, real quick, I want to talk about New York. Do we have 2 seconds to talk about New York?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, this is a passion project of mine. It's always really hard to make it within the time period. But New York, so how many of you guys hear this? Well, abortion, and because of low income, it impacts women of color more than anyone. If you really were compassionate, especially to women of color or people in poverty, you would be okay with abortion because you want to take care of these women of color in poverty. How many of you guys have heard this sort of discussion? Oddly enough, it's very racist. But so it actually feels dirty sometimes even explaining some of the arguments. I will say that. Here's the thing, some facts about New York City and black babies. More black babies were aborted than were born in New York City in 2016 alone, and that stat is still continuing. So we are killing more black babies than are being born, for example. And you have to keep in mind, and this is actually very effective against most pro-choicers. I want you guys to make this very aware. Because remember, they're the ones who usually support things like Black Lives Matter. They're very conscientious of people of color. Don't silence black voices, that whole nine. So this is a rhetorical tool. I will tell you that. This is a rhetorical tool. Be like, well, don't you want black babies to be born? Well, of course I want black babies. Well, over here they're aborting them more than they're being born. How's that not racially like? Why are we not talking about that little statistic, right? So one of the most dangerous people groups actually to be in America is an unborn black child, as black women get abortions at much higher rates than other groups. This is what Planned Parenthood and other groups truly wanted to do, by the way, is to cripple the black community. Have you guys ever looked in the history of Planned Parenthood? We will talk about that probably next week. That was
Not next week.
What?
Not next week.
Not next week, the week after. Yes. Thank you. Yes, no class next week. Thank you, Kathy. That's why we need you. So the minister's work, this is what Margaret Sanger said, and we'll talk about it. She's the founder of Planned Parenthood. We'll talk about it next class, but I just want to leave you on this quote from her. The minister's work is also important, and he should be trained, perhaps by the Federation, as to our ideals and the goal that we hope to reach. We do not want the word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members. And the reason why she was saying this, because she was like, well, we don't want people to accuse us of doing this because of where they were putting Planned Parenthoods and the areas that they were targeting. And as she also has spoken at KKK rallies, accepted multiple speech and engagements, she was very happy about it. So you tell me, again, people will tell me I'm hurting a particular ethnic group because I'm pro-life, when in reality we see that the pro-choice movement is actually hurting a particular people group, along with a lot of other things. So anyhow, any questions, comments, insults? Jordan, I don't like it when you have that smile on your face. It makes me very, I was like, I got a few for you, kid. So, point is statistically speaking, as we go through the stats here, you will find that more and more of this is not quite as the narrative is spun. A lot of data is mixed, and that's just because it really does come down to culture and values. So, anyhow, great. I will go ahead and close up the recording.